Well, something that may be hard for some of you to believe, not all of you, is that Jill and I, in our marriage, in our relationship, when there's like relational gaps or relational tensions, the reality is we fight. It happens in our home. We fight. And I say that may be a little bit surprising for some of you because I think sometimes there's a perception when there's, a religious leader, maybe a reverend, a pastor, maybe the person of the cloth, however you think of it in your mind, that, sometimes you think, hey, behind closed doors, in their marriages, in their relationship, man, things must be just so holy. So like, harps and halos and angels whenever there's tension. For example, not all of you, but some of you may think this, that when Jill and I fight, there's relational tensions and relational gaps, and then I look at Jill, and I look at her, and the angels are singing, the halos are present, and I look at it, and I go, oh, my love, I so desire to be connected to you. I so long because your beauty and your worth and your value, and I've done something to create a gap. It must be me. Would you speak as the angels sing and help me come close to you? And she looks at me and she says, oh, mighty man of God, Buck, I see you in all your profound wisdom. May the Lord give me humility to hear what you have to say. I must have wronged you, mighty man of God. It doesn't happen that way. Not even close. We're human. Jill and I, hey, when we have relational gaps and relational tension, we just fight. And I hate to admit it because it makes me feel a little bit weak, but when we fight, here's some of the things I do. And I don't know about you, but for me, I just withdraw. Like when I get hurt and I don't feel like I'm listened to or I don't feel like things are going well or whatever, I withdraw, I withdraw my affection, I withdraw, physically, I withdraw emotionally, I withdraw relationally. I just want to get away. And that's just kind of one of the things that I'll do. And one of the things that an outcome of that is when Jill and I go to bed and, we're still fighting. And I know there's a Bible passage that says don't go to bed and there's another day, another time we can deal with that. But Jill and I we'll go to bed and we're fighting. And the tension's not resolved and we're sitting there. And one of the things I do, and again, I hate to admit this, but I will scoot myself over further and further and further, my back turned toward Jill. And I'll get on the edge of the bed where I'm like, oh, I'm like falling off. And I'm sitting there, and in my thoughts, my thoughts are like, oh, I hope she sees me. I hope she sees how hurt I am. I hope she sees how angry I am. What she did is so hurtful. I hope she just reaches over and scratches my back and says, oh, babe, can we reconcile? And I just scoot, and I withdraw. And the other thing, if we go even further, something else I do, again, I hate to admit this, but something else that, when we're in phase 2 of fighting and it's getting more severe, Jill and I, one of the things we do when we text one another, we sign XOXO. And that's just part of our habit. We did it when we were younger, and we just keep on doing it. So I love, hey, this is what up, XOXO. Well, when we're in phase 2 of fighting, I move to the place to go, no XOs and XOs. It's just very short, very to the point. And when I know it's serious and when Jill reciprocates that, and she doesn't give XOs and XOs, and I'm like, it's on. Like, here we go. And I'm telling you, every time, we're in this like squab and fighting and all this kind of stuff, I hear my counselor's voice. My counselor will ask me this question all the time. When I share with my counselor, like, hey, here's what's going on, here's life, and we're fighting or whatever, my counselor will ask me this question, which I hate. She'll say, Buck, how old do you feel on the edge of the bed? How old do you feel? And I'm like, 12? If I'm honest, how old do you feel when you sign your, I just feel so young. Now, the point of me sharing that is with you this morning, because maybe you're going like, what in the world? Where are we going? The point of me sharing that is when Jill and I have that going on, Jill comes to a point to where we're going, why are we spending all this like energy trying to hurt one another? Why don't we spend the energy trying to reconcile? And we both feel that. And we're like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And one of the things I'll do is I'll come to Jill and I'll ask her this question. What can I do? Babe, honestly, what can I do? I see you're hurt. I don't want to hurt you. What can I do? Can I do more dishes? Can I do more things in our relationship? Can I do more things with the boys? Can I do more things at work? Can I try to make more money? What can I do? What can I do? And I'm telling you, almost 8 out of 10 times, Jill will respond with this phrase, and this is important. She says, I don't need you to do anything. Babe, you already do enough. I just need you to be with me. I just need you to see me for who I am. I need you to relationally prioritize me. I need affection. I need to know what's going on in here. I need you to be able to share that more with me. I need you to experience more intentionality when I walk in the room. I just need you to be with me. It's not about doing, it's about being. Now, guys, I want to pause right there. And we're going to come back to this. This is really, really important for what we're talking about today. And today what we're doing is we are actually wrapping up this series that we've been in over the last several weeks. And in this series over the last several weeks, what we've been talking about, this series called You Are Here, we've been talking about this, our spiritual journey. And I believe every single one of us are on a spiritual journey, regardless if you're a Christian or not. If you have far more questions about Jesus and belief with Jesus, or in Jesus, I think we're all on a spiritual journey. And the reason why we're talking about our spiritual journey, specifically our Christian spiritual journey, is because, guys, let's be honest. There's a ton of confusion when it comes to the Christian spiritual journey. And this confusion, what we've talked about over the last several weeks, creates all these this sideways energy and these kind of dead ends that we pursue in our Christian journey. And then we get frustrated and we start blaming all these kind of things. The confusion in our spiritual journey causes us to go down these wrong paths or these wrong trails to where we get lost and where we want to give up hope and where we just want to question God and we want to just say, hey, we're done, we're walking away because we get lost on our Christian journey. And the confusion, I think the biggest issue with the confusion is not only does it put us down dead ends and creates a ton of sideways energy on our spiritual journeys, but I think the biggest issue is it causes us to get confused about the outcome of our spiritual journey. And when I say the outcome, I'm not talking about heaven and when we die, where do we go? I'm not talking about, hey, do we have peace with God or not? I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is the outcome of becoming a Christian. In other words, if you're going, hey, I'm deciding whether or not to become a Christian, whether or not to put my faith in Jesus, what am I going to do here? What's the outcome? What's the goal? What's the destination? If I do this, what's going to happen in my life? What has God invited me into? And guys, I'm just telling you, I think if you and I sat down, we all had coffee, just one-on-ones, or for those of you watching or listening online, if we had coffee one-on-ones, I think I'd probably get 100 different answers to that question. What's the destination? What's the goal of this spiritual journey? And so here's the deal. We're doing this whole series because I want to clear that confusion up. I want to ultimately enhance our spiritual journeys, keep us from all this sideways energy. It's just not necessary. It really isn't necessary. And ultimately, my biggest goal, my biggest hope for every single one of us is to actually take some steps to what God invited us into in our spiritual journey. And so to help with every single one of our spiritual journeys, to give us clarity, we've given you this spiritual map. And we've talked about this over the last several weeks. And a map, the point of a map is just to provide direction. It's just to go, hey, a map gives you direction, helps you not get lost. And along the way, there are these 7 distinct trail markers. And you guys know what a trail marker is. If you're on a trail, you're walking down, you see this kind of wooden square, and it says you are here, and here's what you can expect, here's some of the dangers, here's some of the context, here's how much further you have to go. Trail markers provide some very helpful information. So over the last several weeks, we've provided a map to give you direction, and we've provided these trail markers to give you information along the way. And again, my greatest hope is so that we don't spend a lot of energy, going over here and over here, that we can actually go to where God invited us into and get to trail marker number 7. So over the last several weeks, we've unpacked this, and here's what I want to do today. Today, I want to pick up where we left off last week, and last week we left off on trail marker number 3. And I've just got to be upfront with you real quick. Today, it's a lot of information. And for some of you, I think today you're going to go, ooh, I love it. More information. I love that. It's great. Really gave a lot of clarity. For others of you, you're going to fall asleep. And I'm going to see you because I see some of those eyes that are closing, But I just really want to be upfront. If you go to sleep, it's fine. I mean, God's big enough to handle all this stuff. But if you have some caffeine, you might want to drink it now. You might want to take some deep breaths. Get ready for this because it is going to be a lot of information. But my hope is it's helpful and it's clarifying. So here we go. In terms of what we've said so far, is that we said we all start at trail marker 0. Trail marker 0 is this whole idea to go, hey, this is before you become a Christian. This is when you're exploring. This is when you have all these questions. And eventually, the biggest question in trail marker 0 is, who is Jesus? And there's a lot we've talked about with that. But when you come to the place to say, okay, I think the evidence demands Jesus is who he claimed to be, that he's the unique Son of God, that he died on the cross for the forgiveness of my sins so I can have peace with God. I think all the evidence points to that. I've looked at it. Once you make that decision, you decide to go on the journey. And you enter into trail marker number 1. Now, trail marker number 1 is all about new beginnings. This is like, hey, I just became a follower of Jesus. This is all of time of discovery. This is like, wow, I didn't know this about the Bible. I didn't know this about church. I didn't know this about Jesus. And all this forgiveness is like true in my value, my worth, and my identity. You're learning so many things. You're starting to get engaged in so much about discovery. But you're also discovering, and here's the rub, what Jesus invited you into. Morally, relationally, spiritually, financially, sexually. Jesus is crystal clear. So it's like, oh, you're learning all these things about life and Christianity and your worth and value, but now here's everything Jesus invited you into. And that tension moves you to trail marker number 2. And trail marker number 2, there's still a lot of discovery and a lot of great things, and you're stepping in and experiencing the peace of God in brand new ways, a relationship with God. But in trail marker number 2, the biggest distinctive that you're going to experience is you're going to feel like there's a battle. You're going to feel like there's this massive tension, and the tension is really between what Jesus invited you into and what you feel, what you desire, what your emotions say, and what you want. And here's the trick, guys. If you live enough life, the younger you are, this is harder, but the older you get, you understand your emotions, your desires, your wants. When you give into those and you say, yes, I'm going to do that, it actually satisfies. It actually makes you happy. It actually gives you meaning and purpose. I gave into this desire. This is the way God created me. I'm going to do it. Oh, man, it's awesome. But the older you get, you know what that's like. It's like drinking a glass of water. You're thirsty. Well, have a glass of water. Well, now you're not thirsty. It did satisfy. It is true. But you're thirsty 2 hours later, and then 2 hours later, and then 2 hours later, and then 2 hours later. And that's the tension, because over here, Jesus morally, sexually, financially, relationally, spiritually, he's crystal clear. And he says, guys, I have living water. And if you drink it, you will never thirst again. It's something different, and yes, it will come at a cost to you. It will feel like you are losing something, and it will come at a cost to you. And Jesus says the choice is yours. You are 100% free to choose. You can continue pursuing your desires and your emotions and your feelings and your emotion, or all those things, and you're going to remain thirsty. Or I offer you living water, but it may be the hardest thing you've ever done. And yes, it will feel like a cost. And yes, you're going to feel like a death. It's going to feel like a loss. I'm going to have to submit all of these desires and things to you, Jesus, to pursue this. But then Jesus' promise, and I love these words of Jesus. In Luke chapter 9, he says, if you lose your life for me, you'll find it. You'll find something so much better than what your soul has been thirsting for and what your emotions have been desiring your whole life. That's what I've come here to offer. But it'll come at a cost, and it'll feel like a loss. The choice is yours. Jill and I spent in trail markers 1 and 2 over 10 years with this battle, back and forth and back and forth. Trail marker number 3 is when you come to the place to say, I'm in, Jesus. What you say is better. And yes, it comes at a cost, but I'm putting a stake in the ground. I'm going to wrap my life around what you have said. And we begin to wrap our lives around Jesus' activities. We begin to wrap our lives around what he says morally, relationally, sexually, financially, whatever it is. We just say, Jesus, I trust you. I'm in. And we begin to take sips of that living water. And it really does satisfy. There really is a peace that transcends all understanding. That's true. And you can do this for years and years and years. In fact, most followers of Jesus will never get past trail marker number 3. And you can wrap your life around all kinds of things. You can be involved in ministries, leading ministries. You can be a pastor in the church. You can be a lead pastor in the church. And this is all the activities in trail marker number 3. And there's wonderful things you experience. But eventually, and this is where we'll pick up where we left off last week. Eventually in trail marker number 3, this is so important. You get to what I call spiritual treadmill. And this feels like, is this all there is? This feels like, isn't there something more? Like, I've experienced some great things, and yes, I do believe I've taken sips of that living water, and I've experienced something far more transcendent than I've ever experienced, pursuing these things, but is this it? Because, man, I'm doing all this stuff for God, and I'm so busy. And every time I meet with a pastor, every time I meet with a small group leader, every time I meet, I'm just going like, what can I do? What can I do? What can I do? How can I do more? Because I've thought in my mind, the more I do, the deeper I'll go with God. The more I do, the closer I'm going to get to God. And that's partially true. That's part of it. That's part of the journey. But you get to a place where you go, there's got to be more. And then you begin finding yourself saying, I bet it's the church. Bet it's the preacher. Bet it's the ministry. I mean, if the church was deeper, if the preacher was deeper, if the ministries were deeper, then I would experience what my soul longs for. You can do that. And you can go to whatever church the Lord leads you to go to. He's big enough to handle all that. But I can, anytime preachers guarantee, I get nervous. But I can almost guarantee you that you're going to stay on trail marker number 3. You're going to stay on the treadmill because you'll go to that different church for 5, 10 years. And then before long, on that treadmill, you'll get tired again. And church isn't doing it for you. Preacher's not doing it for you. Ministry's not doing it for you. And do you know the question we ask? This brings us full circle to Jill and I's conversation. The question we ask when we're on the spiritual treadmill, Jesus, what more can I do? What more can I do? How can I get involved more? How can I go deeper? What can I do? I mean, Jesus, what is it? Help me do more. Because if I do more, I'll be closer to you. And I think Jesus says something very similar to what Jill says to me. Jesus says to you and I, kiddo, it's not about doing more for me. It's about being with me. It's now time on your spiritual journey. Yes, doing was a big part of that. But come on, I want you to know me. I want you to step into my love. I want you to experience that. I want you to feel what I feel about you. I want you to experience the relational intimacy and inner communication and interconnection, a oneness with me that you've never experienced before. It's now time to start making that shift from doing to being. That is a major, major transition in your spiritual journey. And it's imperative you know that. And so that moves us from trail marker 3 to 4 when you decide, I'm going for it. I've done so much, and now I need to know and discover the heart of Jesus Christ. I need to be more intentional with my relationship. And that moves you to what trail marker number 4 is called a deeper love for Jesus. And guys, it's really important to clarify here that in the spiritual journey, trail markers 0, 1, 2, and 3, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, that's a lot about doing. It's a lot about information. It's a lot of kind of this linear logical thinking. It's like, here's my logical question. Well, fantastic. There's good logical answers to that. Let's talk about that, right? Here's some logical things about the Bible. Here's some logical things about activities. Here's what you can start doing. Here's what you can start wrapping your life. Here's all the things you can do. Wonderful. And when you step into those things and you trust Jesus, comes to the loss, feels like a cost, you do drink some of that living water, and there is a peace that transcends all understanding. That's real. And there's some experiential things that you begin to experience here. But this is very much about doing. But there's a major shift at trail marker 4 where it becomes about being. It becomes about relating. It becomes about discovering his heart and allowing him to discover your heart. And when he discovers your heart, you're allowed to step into his love in a deeper way than you've ever experienced in your life. But here's the rub. How do you quantify experience? How do you do it? If I came to you and I just said, okay, describe fully what it was like having a baby, right? At first, you'd have to have a baby, but if you had a baby, and I said, describe in every detail. Well, you could give me a lot of logical steps, and here's what happened, then the doctor came in, epidural, or, I went all natural, tough, whatever you did, I'm not trying to make fun. I'm just, there's lots of ways. So, you could describe it logically, but I said, no. What I'm talking about, when you held her for the first time, and you brought her to your chest, what happened? When you held him for the first time and you saw his face and you kissed his little head, what happened? What'd you feel? Describe that. You're like, Buck, I can't. I can tell you the logic of that. I can't quite quantify all the experiences that I had in that moment as a father. When you see your newborn son, when Sam was born, my firstborn son, man, I held him right here. I looked. His face was all pudged up, all swollen. His nose was gigantic like his father's. Part of that was the birth process wasn't kind to him. But I looked at him and I was like, oh, that's my son. That literally is my flesh and my bones. I'll do anything for him. Well, but quantify that. Describe that logically. I can't. It's an experience. Guys, that's really important to understand, because when you transition from 3 to 4, you're moving from a lot of linear, logical doing to much more in a place of experiential. It's the intimacy piece. It's the soul piece. It's the heart piece. It's the love piece. That's important to know. So although it is hard to quantify and describe to the best of my ability, I want to spend the rest of our time walking you through what this looks like. So guys, here's the deal. Part of the reason you know you're here, if you've gone from 3 to 4, it's all about doing to being, is what happens inside of you is you start to feel this quite a bit. You start to think, just give me Jesus. It's like, hey, I've checked a lot of the church boxes, I've served, I've written curriculum, heck, I even went to seminary, whatever it may be. I've done all these things. And not that you've arrived at some place, and not that there's not more you can do, but there's just something, there's this longing, it's gotta be more. And your heart really longs for Jesus. It's really that kind of, in a marriage, it's like that 7-year itch. You may have heard that term in psychology. It's that one, in 7 years, if you just are all about doing and raising kids and building your career and doing all these activities, you lose the relationship. And all of a sudden you wake up and who are you? And who are you? And who are you? And that 7-year mark, it's like that moment to go, I really need to prioritize relationship. I really need to discover you. I really need to pay attention to you. When you walk in the room, I want to be attentive. I want to listen to you at a deeper level. When that switch happens, it's the thing that allows you to take that gigantic step in your marriage, and it's the thing that allows you to take that gigantic step in your relationship with Jesus Christ. And you feel that. Just give me Jesus. That's all I want. The Apostle Paul, who's a first century follower of Jesus, he begins to describe what happens experientially. I love the way he says it. Look at this. He says, I once thought these things were valuable, the things of the world, the things we all pursue. I once thought they were valuable, but now I consider them worthless. Really? That's fairly dramatic. Yeah, they're worthless. Why? Because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless, and he tells us why here. Look at this. When compared with the infinite value, this word is so important, of knowing. I didn't do all these things I did now. No, man, I know him. Just telling you, the intimacy in my soul, because I know him. Everything now I'm becoming detached from. Knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I've discarded everything else, counting it as, look at this, garbage, so that I could gain Christ and become one with him. Now, garbage is a dramatic word. That's an extreme word. That's everything outside of a relationship with Christ. Your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with friends, all your work, all your activity, all the things you've accomplished in your life. It's like garbage. Paul, are you saying I should treat them like garbage? No, keep the context in mind. He's saying, I'm just trying to describe what's happening here. And I'm telling you, the closer I grow in intimacy and this kind of inner disposition of my heart and the satisfaction and my identity is being so wrapped up in who Christ says I am, I'm stepping into his love. I'm just telling you, when I'm in that room, I'm detached from everything. And the best I can describe it, nothing compares. It's like garbage. It satisfies all the longings of the human soul. You know how you know you're here? It's when you're like, man, that's all I want. There's got to be something more, and I know it's found in you, Jesus. You offer living water. I'm going, and that's what I want. The other reason you know you're here is that there's a time of reflection. And here's what I mean by this. This begins to shift your habits. In terms of reflection, this is a little bit more you're attentive to God. You're listening for him. This is like when you read the Bible. There may be in trail markers 1, 2, and 3, when you read the Bible, you're like, you go to a friend, hey, I read 15 chapters this morning. Woo! And it's like, that's awesome. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's like, are we racing? What are we doing with But then, trail marker number 4, you go, man, I read 3 words. And God stopped me. He just said, I want you to think of that second word you read this morning, because I want to prepare you for what's going to happen today. I want to talk to you at a deeper level. And you're like, I'm just telling you, it's a time of reflection. It's different. That prayer is not so much about this formulaic thing to go, if I just do the Lord's Prayer in a perfect order, then I'm going to get what I want to get. Now, prayers, you've moved from that. Not that that's not part and you don't ask God for things, but like prayer is far more about, how do I wrap his will around mine? How do I get in a posture today, God, just to see clearly what you want me to see? you know the desires of my heart, but I'm more interested in what you want to say to me. It's a time of reflection. And when you pause a little bit longer, it's a little bit more intimacy in the relationship with God. It's not so much about efficiency. It's not so much about how much you do. It's about, God, what do you have to say to me today? Then all of a sudden, passages in Psalms 46 make sense. You're like, oh man, this totally makes sense. Be still and know that I'm God. You're like, of course. Yeah, I've experienced that. In fact, yesterday I did this and I was sitting there and I thought about all the things I could pray for, but I just kind of sat there and I just listened. I said, God, what do you have for me today? And it's like it was being still before him, setting my heart and mind on him. And it's like he revealed he's God to me in this area of my life or this area of my life. This is a time of reflection when thoughts begin to hit your mind that are transcendent, thoughts beyond your conscience. Let me give you an example of this. It would be a thought like this that hits your mind. God says, why don't you let me love you? Buck, why don't you just let me love you? You're trying to work so dang hard. Don't you remember my words, Buck? Come to me, all you who are weary. All you who are wearing yourself out because you're just working and working and working and working, somehow thinking you're going to get closer and closer to God. No. I get it. Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest. Buck, why is it so hard for you to allow me to love you? When you hear something like that, when that thought hits your mind, you're like, that's beyond my conscience. That's something that lines up with what God would say in the scriptures. And there is a depth that begins to happen. There is something that feels like relational intimacy that you begin to experience. And the biggest challenge in trail marker number 4 that we're all going to experience is busyness. And of course it would be, because practically speaking, in trail marker number 3, you've wrapped your life around busyness. How can I do more and do more? And you're on that spiritual treadmill and your life is so wrapped around the priorities of Jesus that you're like, man, this is actually keeping me from experiencing you in a relational way. I'm so incredibly busy. You get this in a relationship. If you commit to too many things relationally, before long, you're just roommates. How do you get to know? You got to spend the time to get to know. So some of the steps that I would suggest, if you're going to go from trail marker 4 to 5 and deepen this relationship, this experience with God, I would say 1, doing versus being. What I mean by this is a time that it's not like you stop doing, but if you're doing 10 things, you got to say no to 2 of the 10 so you can have more margin and relational space and times of reflection to spend with God, to be intentional with a relationship with God. The second thing I would say is this, and this may sound kind of strange, but I'm just saying in a relationship, if you're not listening, if you're not really listening to her, to him, you're missing it. The relationship will stop at that point. You got to listen to God. What does this look like? Well, practically speaking, this is just asking God, inviting him in. Hey, God, here's a relationship. What do you think about that? I'd love to hear from you. Hey, God, I got a big decision today at work. I want to invite you into that decision. Hey, God, we're thinking about moving. What do you think about that? Hey, God, here's this thing going on inside of me. What is that? Why do I struggle with that? Can you speak into that today? You just start asking questions. You know, I met with a friend of mine a couple weeks ago. We're sitting in my office talking about life, and she was sharing all of her amazing plans, and they were great plans. And I looked at her and I just said, hey, you know, what has God said? Have you invited God into that? And she looked at me kind of shocked, and she said, gosh, Buck, I haven't. I just planned this, next 10 years of my life, and I didn't even invite God into that. Practically speaking, are you listening? Are you inviting? Because that moves to a place of like breathing to life is like inviting God into your spiritual journey. You don't think about breathing. It's just what you do. As you move down the spiritual journey, you don't think about, I have to make it a habit to invite. It's just, man, God, I'm in communion with you. There's a oneness with you. Of course, every aspect of my life. What do you think, God? What do you think? And as that begins to happen, there's an intimacy that develops. There's a richness that develops, and you move from trail marker 4 to trail marker 5, which trail marker 5 is all about this longing for oneness with God. If I could describe it, I would appeal to the Apostle Paul, again, first century follower of Jesus. Look at what he says. This is so interesting and so relationally rich. He says, then by constantly using your faith, that's being active and growing and going down the spiritual journey. Yes, it's risky. Yes, if you struggle with a relationship, this will be far harder. Man, I've struggled with a relationship my whole life. It's very hard. But if you begin to surrender in ways you've never surrendered to God before, continue that journey of faith. The life of Christ will be released, look at this, deep inside of you. And the resting place of his love will become the very source and root of your life. And then he continues and he says, then you will be empowered to discover what every Holy One experiences, the great magnitude of the astonishing love of Christ in all of its dimensions. Now all of a sudden it's like, I used to see Jesus and Christianity and the whole spiritual journey this way. There's now these new dimensions as I grow in this depth of relationship. How deeply intimate and far-reaching is his love, Paul says. And then look at this. He says, how enduring and inclusive it is. Endless love beyond measurement that transcends our understanding. This extravagant love pours into you until you are filled to overflowing with the fullness of God. There's a relationship to where you are being poured into. Again, that is like drinking the living water, that is satisfying the identity, the longings, the value, the worth, the significance, the beauty, everything a human soul longs for. You're being poured into and you're like, wow, I've never experienced anything this good and this new reality in my life. One of the ways you know you're here in trail marker number 5 is you know his love. When I say this, this is not one of those religious activities to go, I want to know his love. I want to know my identity. I want to know my value. I mean, I want to believe what you have to say. You've moved from that. You know it. You know your intrinsic worth and value is found because you're made in the image of God. That's something you don't question. Every now and then you may doubt. You know it. You know your identity isn't in your success and your social media likes and how many people, look at you because of what features, because of your titles, because of your bank account. Those are all that God's given you for a purpose. That's not where your identity is. Your identity is found in who he says you are. In terms of who you are, your worth, your significance, your value, there's such security, there's such fulfillment at this place. And now when you read the words of Jesus in John 15, they make so much more sense. You're like, oh, I am the vine, Jesus says. You are the branches. If you remain in me, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You're like, of course. I have lived that. It's so experiential. Oh man, he just pours into me daily. It's not a habit to read the Bible. It's not a discipline to pray. I can't live without it. I wake up and I just so look forward to spending time with you. And what do you have to say to me today? And at this point, there's such safety, there's such security with your Heavenly Father that there's humility to begin to discover this inner discovery. What I mean by this is all of a sudden, there are layers, there are like doors to your heart and your soul that have been so locked up and so closed that it's so hard for God to love you and so hard for you to allow God to love you and step into his love. And now all of a sudden you find yourself saying things like this. If I had to try to capture it, I would say you go, man, I love God more than I can put into words. It's amazing. And I know he loves me, but where's this anger coming from? Where's all this hurt coming from? Where's this jealousy? Where's this lust? God, would you teach me what that is? And now you begin to take some steps, and if I would suggest one, it would just be journaling. You're writing this down. God is teaching me about my anger and where that comes from. Now there's enough humility to meet with counselors, to meet with pastors. It's not thought of something as weak. I'm a weak man if I do that. I'm a weak woman if, no. Man, it's a discovery. I want to step into the love of my Heavenly Father, allow those doors to open in a way they've never been opened, and receive something to be poured into as the vine and the branches. And now you move in to trail marker number 6, which is simply God's transforming love. The best I could describe this is Paul says in Romans 12. He says, don't copy the behavior, the customs of the world, but look at this word. This is so important. But let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Transform in the Greek, which this was originally written in, is metamorphosis. From a caterpillar to a butterfly. You literally, from the inside out, feel like a new creation. There is a disposition in your soul that is so satisfying in every relationship and every activity. And yes, in trail marker number 6, God continues to pull back the layers of your heart. He continues to open the doors of what's blocking his love from coming in and you being able to step into his love. And yes, there's a spiritual guide, or maybe that's a pastor or counselor who's helping you along the way and reveal the deeper things of your heart, and you're willing to go there. You're not putting up the walls and trying to protect yourself from that hurt, because you know God's going to meet you in that place. And the deeper he meets you, you move eventually to what he invites you into, which is trail marker. Next slide, trail marker number 7. And trail marker number 7 is a love relationship with God. This is what Jesus prayed for in John 17, and we'll wrap up right here. Jesus, 2,000 years ago, prayed for you and prayed for me. He says, I pray for them. What do you pray for? That they experience the same unity that we enjoy. That's the invitation. What does this unity look like in everyday practical life? Well, this means that you're completely one with God. It's everything about God. You've wrapped your whole life. Everything is detached. Just like Paul says, man, when I'm with God, I look at everything else, and I'm just telling you, nothing satisfies like God. It's completely fulfilled in purpose, meaning, worth, value, happiness, peace. It's real. This is possible. That you are completely filled as an individual, that you're completely secure. Your identity as a son, a daughter, your eternity. There is such profound security in your life as a result, and you are completely free to be who God designed you to be. That's the relationship he invited you into. That's when you feel more alive in your life than you've ever experienced with anything over here that you've indulged in or that you've tried. That's why Jesus says, if you lose your life for me, you're actually going to find it. This is what I've invited you into. And I'll leave you with this. I'm not talking about a monk in a mountain by themselves. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a person who is fully alive. And you know what that looks like? Paul says, it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. You follow the life of Christ. He was funny. He had an adventure he lived out. He was relating and active in all kinds of ways. He called the Pharisees on their hypocrisy, and it was hard to hear, and you're like, whoo, there's some security there. He engaged in the 12 disciples. He gave his life. He served. He lived the most wonderful adventure you can imagine. That's what he's talking about. It's not some monk. It's you're fully alive. You're more alive than you've ever been in your life. And so, there it is. That's the map. That's the information. And now it becomes for you. What are you going to do with it? Jesus' invitation to every single one of us is, come to me, all you who are weary, I will give you rest. If you take up your cross daily and you follow me and you lose your life, you'll actually find the life I've invited you into. That's what it looks like. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for your grace. Father, there's a lot of information. Hits a lot of us in a lot of different ways, but you can handle all that. So, Father, I pray that you give us the courage to take a step, whatever that may be, in every one of our lives. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.